Just as a pre-note, because this video involves a recent internet fight over a topic people get really dumb about, any social media post that isn't mine in this video was actually made by former US President James A. Garfield. Send all hate or appreciation to the James Garfield Presidential Library. So a couple of weeks ago, there was an outbreak of discourse on the Evil Bird app about misogyny in Pokémon Horizons and the treatment of one of its protagonists, Liko. Naturally, as these things go, the original post was met with defensive posturing from fans of Liko, fans of Horizons, and fans of not thinking too critically about the presence of girl characters in shows. I don't care about most of this. It's just adult fans of a children's cartoon whining, and I'm at my fucking limit dealing with the random bullshit that older Pokemon fans get upset about, but something about how people were arguing hit my pet peeves. One of the tweets that got a lot of attention was informed by an anonymous question thingy that the writers in charge of Horizons also worked on X and Y, and because they worked on X and Y, that explains why female characters get shafted and ignored. As my mutual, former President James A. Garfield replied, this is patently untrue. None of those people have worked on Pokemon since 2023. Does this matter to the overall discussion about whether Horizons treats its female characters well? No, not really. But as the guy who has made several videos about Pokemon's writers, and even interviewed one, I do take umbrage with the fact that anytime there's some kind of discourse in this fandom, people explain their criticisms by jumping to writing fanfiction about real people. And I do mean every time there's drama, because that's what happens every fucking time. So it's time for another primer. This time about how Pokemon is written, what actually goes into the writing process, who is involved, and what their intentions are. Ultimately, any show is a collection of decisions made by people. How those people think and work is not only interesting, but it also gives us a good starting point for talking about a show. And more importantly, learning about why things are the way they are before we start bitching about them. So, let's begin with a very obvious starting point. Let's define what we mean by writing. This isn't a philosophical question, I just want to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. Writing can either mean pen to paper, writing of a script, or it could mean the creative direction of a show. Chances are we care more about the latter than the former, so let's start there. This is a photo of a writing meeting from an Orange Islands databook. Judging by the Gen 2 Charizard in the background, it was likely taken after the Indigo League. The photo is a good representation of the people who are in the room when a script is made. Let's take attendance of the people in here who are, strictly speaking, not writers. The most notable is Kunihiko Yuyama, the executive director and the highest-ranking person that actually worked on the show. Yuyama led the entire process of the TV anime and directed the movies. Among many other things, he is credited for choosing Pikachu as the anime's mascot. Next to him, based on what my friend and Pokemon writer Hideki Tsunoda could tell me, seems to be Shukichi Kanda, the head producer of the movies and the TV anime. Kanda's job was coordinating the production pipeline between writers, directors, and animators. He was also heavily involved in the initial concepts of the anime, and is credited for coming up with the catchphrase Pokemon Geto Daze. Across from him is associate producer Choji Yoshikawa. Yoshikawa was the liaison between the staff and the executives in the production committee. He also did a lot of omake art and promotional work. He came up with the idea of making Team Rocket into a trio of gag villains, and he wrote the lyrics to May's character song in Pokemon Advanced. Next to Yoshikawa is series director Masamitsu Hidaka. Hidaka was the head of the animation side and managed the day-to-day workload of the TV anime. We don't know whether he was at these meetings just to advise on visuals, or if he was also pitching ideas, but we have to imagine that he was pretty involved. But he is the guy that was quoted as saying that the girl characters in Pokemon were eye candy. The other three people are actual writers, Junki Takagami, Atsuhiro Tomioka, and head writer Takeshi Shudo. But before we start talking about them, there are other non-writers who are involved in the story that are not in this picture. Above the anime staff are a group we can affectionately call the Suits. You can usually find them credited in the opening as producers or planners. While they are not directly involved in the making of the anime, they are important enough that they can override the staff on any creative decision. They don't attend script meetings because they are too important, but they do hold big production meetings where they advise the directors and head writers on the content and structure of the show. Some of the more important decisions that Suits have made include which animation studio to hire to make the anime, whether or not Pokemon could talk, adding Ho-Oh to the first episode, and even titles and content of the movies. The Suits generally aren't involved in episode production. They don't care that in episode 33 of Horizons, Liko and Roy managed to scratch Diana's Arcanine. They do care that this episode features Terapagos turning into its terrestrial form because it aired the Friday before the Indigo Disc DLC dropped. The Suits are involved in the top-down decisions of the show. The content of the Pokemon anime has to sell magazines targeted to Japanese grade schoolers and TV viewers from age 4 through 12. There will always be a hard limit on what the directors and writers can do because the anime has to be suitable to these demographics as well as the Pokemon brand itself. If you ever wonder why the show is kind of basic, that's why. Before we get back to writers and writing, I want to make something clear. While all of the roles I have mentioned do still exist, None of the people in this photo work on the show in 2026. The nature of being a long-running show is that over time, people are fired, quit, retire, or die. After a long enough period, you're playing Ship of Theseus with the staff. Whatever rumors you heard about the original anime staff, true or not, probably not, do not apply to the modern show production. Almost 30 years have passed since this photo was taken. A lot has changed. From now on, when I use the word writer, I am referring to screenwriters. These people write screenplays for individual episodes. Their job involves the technical skill of representing dialogue and action in written format, and the creative skill of, telling a story. They take the ideas from the director or head writer, pitch their own, and translate that into words on paper. Those words on paper are then given to storyboarders who translate those words into visuals. The writers are sort of an intermediary part of the production process. In general anime production terms, there are 3 broad categories of writer. The first are generically called literature. On top of screenwriting, their job is to coordinate the script creation process. Usually you see this role on shows like Sazai-san, where there is no set stable of writers or long-term plot. Literature people don't really exist in Pokemon, though starting with Horizons, there is now a script coordinator, which sounds kind of the same. The second type of writer are series composers. They, along with literature staffers, can be referred to as head writers, even though their jobs are slightly different. Series composers work in tandem with the director to come up with the narrative of the show, often, but not always, serving as the lead story developer. They oversee the writing team, coordinate the production of scripts, assign episodes to individual writers, and provide feedback at script meetings like those in the photograph. Series composers of original anime might be the ones in charge of coming up with the main characters, important story beats, plot structure, and pacing, or they might just be the director's stenographer. It depends on the show. Pokemon's situation is somewhere in the middle. Directors like Yuyama depend on the series composer to flesh out the show. Part of it is logistics. Directors have to manage a show that runs 45 to 50 weeks out of the year, and they cannot write that many episodes on their own. But Pokemon also relies on horizontal, or episodic, storytelling. The plot is there to provide a backdrop for the characters to be put in different situations. Story beats like gym badges serve as milestones rather than actual narrative. With a typical series having 140 so episodes these days, the directors need help from a series composer to make sure the show is consistent and has an overarching narrative as a backdrop. You also need a bunch of writers to make sure that episodes are diverse enough to be interesting. That brings us to the third type. The writers! These guys are interesting because unlike directors and animators, studios don't have in-house writers. Writers are basically commissioned on an episode-by-episode basis and brought into the fold through connections to the director, producer, or head writer. More often than not, screenwriters work for multiple studios on multiple projects at the same time. They may write up to 5 to 15 episodes a year on a show, and get some side work for things like novelizations, magazine features, or audio dramas. On average, Pokemon has about 7 to 10 regular screenwriters at any given time. The way it works is that the series composer, director, or producer assigns an episode premise, and the writer creates the plot outline. If the outline is approved, then they get to expand it into a screenplay. Screenplays usually take a month or more to go from commission stage to the final product. In the meantime, they go through several rounds of feedback and revision. We have multiple iterations of Shoji Yonemura's screenplays for the 20th movie, and a draft of Takeshi Shudo's plot outline for Episode 9. Neither one of these is a finished product, and Shudo was head writer at the time too, so it goes to show that even his work didn't go through the process unscathed. The cool thing about Pokemon from a screenwriting perspective is that because the show is so episodic, writers have a lot of latitude to write what they want, provided they hit the bullet points of their commission. And those can be as simple as, main character meets this Pokemon. Writers can come up with characters of the day, they can make up interesting bits of lore, and if you know what you're looking for, you can see a lot of personality in each individual episode. Series composers usually write the lion's share of episodes, so entire series take on a different personality as well. Indigo League was kind of an anything goes situation because that was Takeshi Shudo's style. Diamond and Pearl was more arc-driven and battle-focused because that's what Atsuhiro Tomioka liked. Sun and Moon went back to more slice-of-life storytelling because Aya Matsui thrived on that. And so on. As a result, Pokemon plays to the strengths of its writers. It's not as cut and dry as thinking that one writer is good at battle, so they only write gym battles. Everyone writes everything. Though there are some cases of writers being responsible for certain characters. Junki Takagame and Yukiyoshi Ohashi created most of Team Rocket's backstory. Akemi Amode wrote the important episodes of Serena's arc in X and Y. And so on. Something I want to make very clear before moving on is that the writers for Pokemon are all very, very good at their jobs. Every iteration of the writing team has a combination of top-of-the-line veterans, solid mid-career professionals, and promising rookies. Atsuhiro Tomioka was a baby when he started on Pokemon. He is now the head writer of Toei's Super Sentai shows and a regular fixture on huge shonen series like One Piece. During Junki Takayame's tenure on Pokémon, he was also the head writer for Yu-Gi-Oh!, Naruto, and a screenwriter for Inuyasha. Over the years, Pokémon has even brought in heavyweights for a cup of coffee, like Junichi Fujisaku, Reiko Yoshida, and Toka Machida. That's why it's a pet peeve of mine whenever I hear dumb shit like fire the writers and get ones who know what they're doing. You're not going to get a better cohort of writers than what you have at any given time. The fanbase is absolutely spoiled rotten with the caliber of talent that work on this show. In spite of everything, I think the Liko situation is actually a good case study for the topic of this video. By understanding how the show is written, we can tackle a topic of interest without defaulting to really annoying and shallow bitching. So let's talk about Horizons, how it's so different and why that is interesting. For starters, Horizons is the first time that the anime has seriously attempted vertical storytelling. That is, the narrative is not just a bunch of goals to be met while cool things happen. There is a plot, and episodes build on each other towards resolutions to that plot. There's still filler, but it's rare. From a creative standpoint, Horizons has a fairly new staff. Kunihiko Yuyama had been gradually pulling back from production since X and Y, and finally retired at the end of Journeys. His successor is Daiki Tomiyasu, who has been a creative lead on the anime since 2016. This is the first time that Tomiyasu hasn't had Yuyama supervising him in some capacity. Most of the writing staff is completely brand new. The two exceptions are Michihiro Tsuchiya and Deko Akao, who've only worked on Pokémon since 2019. Horizons also has two new head writers. Dai Sato, most famous for being the creative head of Eureka 7, is the series composer. His company, Story Writers, provided a lot of the manpower for the early episodes of Horizons. Kureha Matsuzawa, a novelist and stage writer by trade, is the script coordinator. It's not clear how their work is divided, but as of this writing, Matsuzawa has written over a third of the episodes for Horizons, so he is the most directly involved. And again, the entire creative staff of Horizons is very talented. Tomiyasu gets flack from certain fans for his preferred type of storytelling, but he is a stupendous director. The episodes that he storyboards are some of the most spectacular looking that the anime has ever had. Dai Sato is one of the most decorated screenwriters out there. He is one of Shinichiro Watanabe's favorite writers to work with for a reason. Matsuzawa is still a rookie, but he was brought on because his Poketoon, Blossom's Dream, is a huge fan favorite. You can find plenty of tweets and comments from James A. Garfield saying that this short is what the anime should be. So, if the anime is delivering long-term storytelling with a popular new girl protagonist and a whole new staff of really talented people, why are fans mad and calling them misogynistic? From what I've seen, the argument from reasonable people isn't that Liko is portrayed in an overtly sexist manner. She's not put into provocative outfits, she is not damseled, she doesn't do silly girl things, most of her friends, rivals, and mentors are women, and she's not portrayed as lesser than the boys. She wins a lot, she has a fully evolved team, and she is central to the narrative of the show. I asked reasonable people what their criticisms were. Their explanation was that, since the time skip around episode 90, the show has been favoring Liko's male co-protagonist Roy over her. Roy has gotten more focused episodes, he has gotten a lot of cool things like Mega Evolution and catching a Rayquaza. Liko has gotten other stuff, but nothing that cool. They fear that the writers are pivoting back to focus on the male main character. Hence, there is a sexist element in how the writers treat Liko. If so, are they abandoning Liko because the male executives or writers don't see a female protagonist being viable? I don't like this argument. It feeds into one of the fanbase's worst habits, one I like to call scorekeeping. There's an assumption that if Roy gets something, Liko needs to get something too, or else the writers hate one of them. It's basically power scaling, but instead of feats and anti-feats, they talk about number of episodes, or even lines per episode, and they end up reducing the narrative and intentionality down to bean counting. Also, another reason I don't like it, Roy's been after Rayquaza since episode 6. Of course he was going to catch it. The only way this could be surprising is if you only absorb the show through social media, and I know plenty of people complaining do that because they say that they are. I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong for feeling a certain way about a cartoon. I only care when people use their headcanons to accuse writers of misogyny because Liko didn't get Mega Evolution. And with the way social media works, it's never reasonable people that get signal boosted. It's dumb bullshit like this. So I'll go to bat for the reasonable people with some more context that might explain why Liko feels a bit underwhelming. For starters, there aren't a lot of women writers working on Horizons. Horizons does have a female series director, Saori Den. While Den is in the same boat as Hidaka, in that we know she's involved but not how much narrative input she has, the fact that she is in that position does show that Pokemon isn't a complete sausage fest. But there are only two women writers for Horizons, Deko Akao and Kimiko Ueno. Not only were both of them brought on later than most of their male colleagues, but they have also written fewer episodes than all of their male colleagues. Except one guy, who may have been fired early on. That's a whole kettle of fish, it's not relevant here. This imbalance isn't uncommon in the anime industry, but Pokemon had been pushing more parity between the sexes in recent years. Sun and Moon had a female head writer with Aya Matsui, and Journeys had its first female director in Makiko Daira. Both series had a lot of women writers that just haven't been replaced for Horizons. That does feel wrong for the first series to feature a girl protagonist. If nothing else, having women in the writing room more often would make the male leads more aware of how to present certain aspects of femininity. If nothing else, having women in the writing room more often would make the male leads more aware of how to present certain aspects of femininity. That's not something I've come up with. Male director Junichi Sato, who has created tons of girl anime over the years like Sailor Moon, Doremi, and A Whisker Away, has said exactly the same thing. He relies on the experiences of his female writers to inform how he directs a show or movie. Pokémon has benefited from that in the past. They should keep doing it. Moving from structure to intention, there is something a lot of people should know. All the information I'm about to give, by the way, was in the Terra leaks. It was brushed over by the wider fandom, except for the fact that Liko is meant to be 13 rather than 10, because that's just how the fandom is. So the thing is, Liko wasn't originally planned to be the main protagonist. Actually, in the initial pitch for Horizons, Roy was the main character. The story would start from his perspective, and follow him as he joins Liko and the Rising Volt Tacklers on their journey. Liko would have served the same purpose that many other girl protagonists did, be an appealing gateway for Japanese girls aged 4 through 6. She seems to have been conceived as a girl with a mysterious artifact, the type you see often in mecha or hobby anime. You might think Daisato was reheating his work on Eureka 7, but chances are he was also stealing from Nadia's Secret of Blue Water, given that Horizon's internal production name was Vern. Liko would have still been important, but probably as a 1B to Roy's 1A. That's not stated anywhere. I'm making an assumption because that's how Pokemon's always done girl characters. At some point, someone decided that Liko should be a full protagonist. Having a female lead, or in this case, a male-female double protagonist with an especially strong girl, was something that they couldn't do before Horizons for obvious reasons. The suits involved said they wanted to do it just to do it. I also think they made the decision to better appeal to the girl's demographic, because that's something that Pokemon has been consciously trying to do for over 30 years. So that's kind of the irony of the situation. It's not that the staff don't have faith in Liko. They believed in the appeal of a female protagonist enough to completely change the trajectory of the show. But for now, Roy gets to shine because he is also a main character, always was planned to be one, and, for lack of a better word, it's his turn. This is how dual protagonists are supposed to work. They didn't before because the old protagonist stayed around for way too fucking long. I get the fear that the staff is going to sideline your favorite character, but the fear is unfounded. Liko is very popular. She often places high in magazine polls where 10 of the top 25 spots are always Precure characters. The target audience loves her, the suits wanted her in order to be more inclusive of girls, and if this controversy is any indication, the writers have done well in getting people attached to her. Unfortunately, that includes the weirdos and the grifters. If you get nothing else out of this video, let it be that the writers are competent and they do care. They may not have the same priorities as the older audience, but the older audience barely agrees on what their priorities are to begin with. No one goes into a creative field like screenwriting because it is easy or lucrative. They do it because they are passionate about creating, and no one doing that type of work wants to make bad things. So if that's the case, why is Pokémon badly written? The obvious answer is that it is a toy commercial for Japanese grade schoolers with a lot of different people's money attached. Yes, kids deserve to have good shows too, and that's why Pokémon has a lot of episodes where the writers do punch well above their weight class. But you're not getting cinema from that type of production, no matter how good your staff are. There is no magical group of writers who could replace the current one and fix everything. If you're one of the folks delusional enough to think fans could, you're an ignorant clown. Over the past 3 to 4 years, Pokémon has had a rough production environment. Most of the anime industry has, because there's too much stuff being made and not enough staff to make it. Pokemon's situation is especially tough because it is a weekly running show that does not have seasonal breaks. That is becoming unsustainable industry-wide. Even a much larger studio like Toei is making its weekly cash cow One Piece go seasonal. Will Pokemon do the same? Probably not, given who produces it. But we can hope. I would be glad to be wrong. Granted, this problem more directly affects the animation side of production rather than the narrative side, but it is hard to plan ahead on the narrative when faced with an uncertain schedule. An otherwise fine script can be harmed by inconsistent animation or a poorly paced storyboard too. This isn't a skill issue, most of the time. The problems are much bigger than a hack writer or director. None of this is to say that you shouldn't criticize the writing of Pokémon Horizons. Hell, I'll do that right now. The staff has more ideas than they can effectively execute on, and too many characters that sound cool in concept appear so infrequently that it's hard to get attached. Matsuzawa keeps writing episodes where characters stand around and explain things that have been going on. They're not meant to be introspective, they're not funny, and they aren't visually interesting. This might be due to production issues, or this might be due to his background in writing novels. Either way, people are right when they call Horizons a yap fest. For a Pokemon show, Liko and Roy have been written well individually, but as a duo, they're kind of underwhelming. Their characters are too nice, and their interactions come off as artificial. But this problem has existed since X and Y, so it is probably above the writer's pay grade to fix. Finally, while I think vertical storytelling can work for Pokemon, the way they've handled the rare filler episodes hasn't been especially fun. Except for Mighty G. Every episode with him is great. Please give Kimiko Ueno more episodes. Don't be fooled though. I love Horizon so far, and that's why I hate on it. I'm sure you have your own criticisms, and I probably agree with some of them. But if you want to do more than add noise, the lowest bar is that you know something about what you're criticizing, especially when talking about real-life people. Otherwise, your hate does nothing but add noise. And you end up sounding like just another James A. Garfield. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, you might appreciate my video on Pokemon's movie writer, my good friend Hideki Sonoda. Or you might like my video on the episodes of Kanto head writer Takeshi Shudo. Researching for both of those videos pushed me into making this one. As always, remember to subscribe too. Bye, Inara!